Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The United Nations Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres convened a high-level meeting regarding the ways and the deliberations upon those ways to engage with the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. This particular high-level huddle took place on 18th and 19th of February, and the Taliban were absent from this particular high-level huddle. Now, this was the second UN-organized meeting to discuss the situation in Afghanistan in less than a year. In the previous one, the Taliban were not included as well. Let me bring in a statement by the United Nations Secretary General himself as to the reasons of the absence of the Afghan Taliban in this particular high-level moot. He said, let me quote, "I received a letter from the Taliban with a set of conditions to be present in this meeting that were not acceptable. These conditions denied us the right to talk to other representatives of Afghan society and demanded a treatment that would to a large extent be similar to recognition," unquote. Now, since the Kabul takeover, we have seen those promises which were made by the Afghan Taliban to the international community have remained unfulfilled, and there has been criticism and also the alarm that was expressed repeatedly by the international community when we specifically talk about a number of UN reports also. And now this particular conference has also set a loud and a clear message to the Afghan Taliban that any sort of international recognition actually requires the fulfillment of those key conditions. The first and the foremost happens to be not allowing the Afghan soil to become the hotbed of the terrorist activities. The second happens to be the inclusive government and also the respect for the human rights, including the rights of girls and women. Also another contentious point between the international community and the Afghan Taliban happens to be the appointment of the UN Special Envoy in Afghanistan, and the United Nations Secretary General in this regard has said the decision to appoint the envoy would be taken in consultation with the stakeholders and the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. Earlier we saw the United Nations Security Council in December passed a resolution regarding this particular move, the appointment of the UN Special Envoy in Afghanistan. This particular move has, however, been opposed by the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. The Taliban also, we see there has been a concern that has been repeatedly conveyed to the Afghan authorities when it comes to Pakistan. There has been a resurgence of terrorism in Pakistan also, and the banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan was mostly involved in those horrific terrorist incidents, attacks that it carried out here in Pakistan using the Afghan soil. But there has been a denial of the banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan on the Afghan soil by the interim Afghan authorities. We will also be discussing that particular aspect in this show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Nasir Ali Khan, his former ambassador. Mr. Khan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik, his senior analyst. Mr. Malik, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Ahsan Hamid Durrani. He is director at the Policy Research Center. Mr. Durrani, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Ambassador Khan. Now, talking about the absence of the Taliban from this very important huddle, what does that depict?
Well, according to some people, without the presence of the de facto authorities or the Taliban government representatives, this whole exercise is quite futile. I don't entirely agree with this, because it has given an opportunity for all the stakeholders that have an interest in Afghanistan to be able to meet and form a consensus and a sort of united front as far as their efforts in Afghanistan are concerned. So despite the fact that for whatever reasons the Taliban were not part of this mood, I think there are many positive things that have come out of it. And I must also mention that the Taliban's representative in Doha, they have an office in Doha, did have a meeting with the representative of the United Nations, obviously on the sidelines. But having said that, it is something that must be ongoing, and both sides have promised, according to the statement of the Secretary General, that they will continue to have bilateral discussions after this meeting with the Taliban to discuss ways in which they would eventually agree to come on board. Because right now they had two major issues. One, that they wanted to be treated as a government participant, a recognized government participant, which doesn't mean they need recognition at this point, but they must be treated at the conference as a government. And secondly, they had an objection to the other members of civil society which this meeting was engaging with. Again, if they continue to stay engaged, I'm sure there are issues that they can sort out.
Right, now this is the second UN organized gathering that happened within 1 year. Last time the Taliban were absent as well. Shouldn't it be the concern for the international community that two back-to-back gatherings when it comes to the discussion of the situation in Afghanistan and the de facto authorities are not willing to participate? And
the last time they were not invited. So this time the fact that they were invited, I think, is progress in a sense. And obviously, if they are the main stakeholders, I think they should be convinced, and not only through United Nations representatives, but all the other stakeholders, and especially the neighbors of Afghanistan that have influence in Afghanistan, should continue to engage bilaterally to try to convince them that this is a joint effort for the benefit of Afghanistan. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think we have a unique position in all such engagements, because not only do we have a long-standing relationship with Afghanistan, but we also have a very strong and old relationship with the present government, and we have a lot of commonalities of language, of tribes, of religion, of trade that other countries do not enjoy. So Pakistan will continue to play a very, very important role. And as far as our own personal bilateral situation is concerned, I think we must go out of our way to improve our relations with Afghanistan as well as with Iran, because we need our neighbors to be friendly, to be prosperous, and to be able to engage with us constantly.
Right. Mr. Malik, what's your understanding? What does this absence of Taliban depict in this particular mood?
Yes, as Ambassador mentioned, first time they were not invited, and this time around they declined to attend, although they were invited. So it reflects their very rigid stance as far as the expectation of the neighbors and stakeholders in the region as well as the international community. And I think they should have shown little bit of flexibility.
Would you consider it a mistake on their part?
I would say it's unfortunate, because ultimately it's the Afghan people who are going to suffer, not the regime in Kabul. What stance they are taking, I mean, this time once they took over, almost 2 years now, we had mixed feeling, and there were a lot of analysts right here in the studio who were of the opinion, who were very optimistic that these Talibans are, they are better educated, they have now learned the art of diplomacy, and they would be probably, dealing with the foreign policy issues much better than their first stint in Kabul. But unfortunately, they haven't learned anything, I would say, and they continue to be rigid, and they do not understand the sensitivities of their neighbors, of the regional players, and obviously the humanitarian and human rights issues, particularly with reference to women and girls, education, certain liberties which are within, I think, giving some flexibility within the norms and their cultural domain, they could have afforded little bit of flexibility if they want the world to help them. I mean, I really can't understand that on what basis are they asserting themselves so much, because it is just an attitude as if you come on table after having won a war. They are not negotiating an exit of America at this stage, or the people who are engaging them, they represent almost the entire world, which are apparently, and we have reasons to believe that they are thinking for the people of Afghanistan.
Right, Mr. Durrani, what's your understanding? Is it a mistake on their part, on the part of the Afghan Taliban, not to participate despite an invitation given? And what sort of repercussions do you?
Yeah, I think that's the repercussion part is the most important part. I think, look, Jawad, whatever is happening in the world right now with the war in Palestine, then you have the situation in Ukraine, there is a donor fatigue right now. And Afghanistan needs every penny from the donors. What we have seen is that currently they are embroiled in a economic downturn. They have not given opportunities for the international NGOs and the UN agencies. Even currently they are having a fight with the UN on the appointment of the UN Special Envoy in Afghanistan, and they are back and forth, they are negotiating on that. So Afghanistan, this is clear that Afghanistan needs every penny from international donors. This platform, while providing that opportunity to the Taliban regime, also was a platform for them to voice their concerns. I think it's a huge mistake for them to let it pass, not take full opportunity of this dialogue. And I think Taliban have to earn their way to the table if they want to be treated as a legitimate government.
What do you think? What keeps them from understanding where the world stands right now vis-a-vis Afghanistan?
I think it is in their inherent nature, the way they have progressed, the way their organization works, the way they have evolved over time. I think they're still, sorry to say, in their mind they are a ragtag group. They still need to go a long way to evolve as a government and to be taken seriously as a government by the world powers, by the international community. And for that to happen, they have to make their house in order. They have to form an inclusive government. The definition of the inclusive government can be different. It is debatable, I know. But they have to give girls the equal right to education, to employment. They need to stop using Afghanistan as a hotbed of terrorism against their neighbors. What we have seen in the recent UN analytical report, that it clearly points towards Taliban support towards TTP against Pakistan. So I think these are the measures that they need to take in order to be taken seriously by the international community.
When you describe of this inherent nature in that particular group, so don't they realize that, or are they actually in this particular viewpoint, with this particular viewpoint, that this particular inherent approach or attitude of them actually serves them or the people of Afghanistan in the longer run?
I don't think it serves the people of Afghanistan in the longer run. It serves their organizational interest. It keeps them from getting fractured. It keeps them tightly knitted together with this sort of approach that they have. So it is working for their organizational structure, but it is not working for the socioeconomic prosperity or for the development of Afghanistan, and they will realize it going down the road.
Right. Mr. Khan, now you already talked about the conditions which were set in that particular letter, which were unacceptable for the United Nations, as has been explained and mentioned by the United Nations Secretary General himself. What's your analysis of these, by looking at these very two conditions to be treated as a government when you actually are not the DJO government, not recognized internationally? How can you expect the international community or the United Nations to treat you that way? So is it justified in that sense at all?
Look, the Taliban are a very different animal. When we talk about human rights, for instance, 2.5 years ago when they were having talks in Doha, they made a very strong point regarding their culture. They said, whatever you want to talk to us about, we have our own culture, and we are not going to have you impose your culture on us. So it's a question of values.
So
when you talk about democracy,
the thing beyond just the mere consideration of culture of themselves, right? When it comes to those obligations, those promises which they had made, didn't actually depend on what sort of a culture they did have in Afghanistan. It was primarily dealing with the safety and the security, especially of not allowing the Afghan soil to be used for terrorist activities. Does it have to do anything with their culture or the inherent culture?
No, I'm not talking about...
And what about the inclusive government? I mean, does it have to do with that inclusive government also, that particular inherent culture?
Yes, I'm not trying to defend them. I'm trying to make you understand their way of thinking, okay? Whatever they are, whoever they are very conscious of the culture in Afghanistan. One day they will realize themselves that keeping away half the potential workforce of Afghanistan is going to damage Afghanistan. But they have more urgent problems at hand. For example, we talk about donor fatigue. Well, they say if you can return the foreign exchange reserves that have been kept from us and don't impose all kinds of conditions which are, in their opinion, totally unfair, I think our economy could come back on track. If you could open international banking channels for us to have normal trade, then I'm sure that our economy has a lot of potential, and there are many people waiting to invest in our country. But on the one hand, you are trying to bind their hands, and on the other hand, you are making them increasingly dependent on international agencies. They are very wary of foreigners. We were wary of foreigners. We were closing down NGOs over here. So they are very wary of that. The other point, of course, that you made about an inclusive government, again, they will finally realize that if they are to rule in a peaceful manner for a longer period, they will have to include different ethnicities, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, and of course, most of them are Pashtuns. But these things, I think we need to be a little bit patient with them on this. As far as human rights in general are concerned, you need to look around you and see how human rights are being trampled underfoot with the whole world watching. I mean, we don't even agree on a ceasefire where every day hundreds of people are dying in Gaza, right? And there are countries that are vetoing a ceasefire. We are not saying that there should be a ceasefire from just the Israeli side. We are saying maybe we are asking for a ceasefire from all sides, but you must stop the killing from both sides. So, you know, there are many instances in our region where human rights are being trampled, but the world is still engaging with them. The world is still doing trade with them. So we need to look at this problem slightly differently. You need to realize that they feel that they're being pushed into a corner. In some cases, they are being held hostage because their international banking system, they've been blocked from that system. If you look at China now, if you look at India, when the Americans left in August of 2021, most of the people in the region felt that it's a great setback for India because they were supporting a government, several governments, that were against the Taliban. And now you see through the Iranians, the Indians are making inroads, and they have changed the staff in the embassy in India.
Like for how much time do you think the world should let the Taliban make an understanding that what is actually required from them to be done?
Look, I mean, if you give them a level playing field, then very soon you will see that they become automatically part of a global community. I'll give you an example. Let's say that there are lithium deposits in Afghanistan. Right now they have only one choice, that China engages with them. China is doing infrastructure deals with them. They're doing mining deals with them. What about the rest of the world? In Europe, there are so many countries. In South America, in Canada, there are so many companies where their own businesses are very high-tech, They are much more efficient, but they have saturated their markets. They would love to come to Afghanistan. But once they come to Afghanistan, they will also want to discuss the conditions over there. So once you open up Afghanistan, then slowly it will take its time to come back into the international community. So when you enter the global community, you automatically have to assume certain responsibilities and certain responsible behaviors.
Wasn't it the Taliban who actually made those promises to the international community, and they had something to show to the international community to gain international community's confidence first, rather than the equation being played from the other side?
Let me tell you something. It was the Western world that was keen to engage with the Taliban, okay? It was not the Taliban that was so keen. It was at the behest of the Qataris, and you must give them credit for it, that they had given them a window to the rest of the world. They had an office before the Americans left Afghanistan. And so it is not the Taliban who are desperate to engage with these people. It is the other people, because you see, there are several issues here. The major issue is that if the economy of Afghanistan were to collapse, then not only will we have a larger influx of refugees, even Europe might have more refugees. And under the conditions that you see in Syria and Iraq and all that, Europe does not want another refugee problem. The other thing about Afghanistan is it continues to be a major pivot for trade routes to go into Central Asia. That is another thing that the international community is interested in. Now the Taliban realize all this. They do. And they are keen to do business because you can see the way they are doing business with China. Now what Pakistan ought to do is open these trade routes, open opportunities for Afghanistan, show them that they are our brothers. And of course, our main concern today is the TTP or the ISIS, Khorasan and all. These things come through engagement and constant talks, but it comes through give and take. When they see that you are in earnest and you want to solve their problems, I'm sure they will be willing to change their attitude.
So, Mr. Malik, do you agree with a very optimistic view as to the engaging with the Taliban is concerned? I'll come to you, Mr. Khan, regarding Pakistan's engagement, the possibilities and the prospects in that regard, after Pakistan has done so much already for the people in Afghanistan. Mr. Malik, your take regarding is as to the conditions which have been set in that letter that was sent to the United Nations Secretary General to be treated as a government, and also not to talk to any other representatives except them. Right. So do you think these two conditions were justified at all, which the United Nations Secretary General categorically said that were not acceptable?
Very respectfully, I would beg to differ with Ambassador Saab, because I think Pakistan's flexible and accommodating attitude as a matter of policy has been taken as a weakness by them. And they haven't shown, any response to whatever has happened to us. I mean, there are two issues. I'm talking particularly with reference to terrorism in Pakistan and concern of other neighbors as well. There is one capacity issue, definitely, and the other, which is very obvious after being in power for now almost 2 years, that is of intent. If they have intent and they do not have capacity, they can still cooperate. But they are trying to play neutral, and at times they are in a denial mode as if this problem doesn't exist. So with that kind of attitude, how do we expect that Pakistan, what else Pakistan can do to support them?
Especially Pakistani authorities are already facilitating the Afghan peace and reconciliation efforts, also advocating Afghanistan's case at all the international fora, also hosting millions of Afghan refugees over here for years and years on.
And as regards China, China has almost informally, recognized them. Because China has interest, they have their stakes in terms of, their Belt and Road Initiative, and they want to engage because there are massive opportunities for them. They want to develop infrastructure over there. So if they think that, I mean, Chinese policy is definitely a different ball game. Rest of the world,
Chinese also want peace, don't they? I mean, the spillover effect of terrorist activities.
Yes,
there is a threat.
it's Chinese concern as well. Exactly. But rest of the world doesn't exercise that kind of patience, I would say, like the Chinese philosophy of dealing with certain conflict areas. So I think I would still reiterate that a better sense should prevail. And one thing I don't know why they fail to realize, that first time, once they took over in Kabul, at that time the local people by and large looked at them as saviors, because of a war-torn country. They were trying to dispense justice. Still there is a question mark of the way they were doing, but people felt sort of relieved. But now there is a youth in Afghanistan. There is a sizable population who have worked for almost 20 years with allied forces, who have been exposed to the social order as of the Western world. So Western culture. So these are their own people. They cannot do away with that. They can be hostile or unfriendly with the neighbors, but they cannot ignore or remain in denial as far as the awakening of their own people is concerned. I mean, they could keep all the women folk of 90s in a shuttlecock burqa or tied inside the four walls.
This is one thing that has to do with their culture. The one thing that has been mentioned by Mr. Khan also. There was a statement by Zabiullah Mujahid also. Perhaps the UN preoccupation with Afghan women was unwarranted and dismissed the concerns of the United Nations. Now, let me quote it, what he had to say. Afghan women wear hijab of their own accord. They don't need to be forced. The Vice and Virtue Ministry hasn't forced anyone to wear hijab either. That's what he has to say about it.
Probably hijab is not the only issue. If we are talking about culture, Afghanistan and Kabul, they had overall, Afghanistan and Kabul had two different cultures. Kabul was very modern even in 60s and 70s. So if this, I mean, minimum the world is expecting that at least within the capital, within Kabul, the education, I mean, they can give them education, okay, in separate, women colleges or women or girls schools.
They've been banned from going to the university, schools, from education also. They've been banned from going to get the employment as well as with the United Nations and its agencies as well. And also regarding this particular thing that I've already mentioned. So keeping this aside, what about the rest of the two?
You see, they are very rigid. They are, almost that rigid as they were, in case of that Baiman, temples that they were trying to destroy, or the rest of the world's sensitivities. Today's media savvy environment, and I mean, I would really, appreciate and agree with the Ambassador Saab that, world definitely have different standards to deal with similar conflicts. As far as Middle East is concerned, they have a different set of rules and standards, and while dealing with conflicts in other Muslim countries, they have a different set of conditions. But then we have to be realistic that after all, what Israel has done, they have managed to muster support from almost the entire world. There are very few voices against what they kind of genocide they are doing. But do they enjoy that kind of support from anybody, starting right from their neighbors? So, I mean, they have to be realistic. They cannot, reverse the time and bring back their previous rule of 90s.
No, so Mr. Malik, what is the major contentious point between the international community and the de facto authorities of Afghanistan? Is it dealing with terrorism first, or is it forming the inclusive government first, or is it the third one, respect of human rights, especially when it comes to the rights of girls and women? Out of these three, which is of the prime value for the international community, what they want to see from the Afghan Taliban to be fulfilled at first that perhaps might serve as a confidence building measure to gain a little bit of confidence from the international community, and perhaps international community might start thinking about a future possible recognition of that?
I would say a little bit of all 3 points, because as far as all-inclusive government is concerned, because they had invested in other factions so much that they would not like to support a government without people who have been part or and part and parcel of whatever arrangement we had for almost 20 years in Afghanistan. Secondly, they are accountable, taxpayers' money has been spent in trillions over in Afghanistan. So the very basic premise of the first invasion in Afghanistan was, other than 9/11, it was, if you go over those agenda points, the women right and development and economic development and social development, these were the slogans on which the entire narrative was built. So they cannot abandon that point of view and show flexibility beyond a certain point. So they have to pursue probably all 3 pillars to deal with Afghanistan. So that's my point on it.
Right. Mr. Durrani, out of these 2 conditions sent to the United Nations Secretary General, do you think any of these are justified at all? I mean, that treatment as a government when you're not a de jure government, not recognized internationally, and the other representatives from other stakeholders from Afghanistan not to be included, and the talks to be happening with them exclusively. So is this very foundation, if there is any intention at the back of mind as far as Taliban are concerned of forming an inclusive government perhaps later sometime in future?
Well, I think the Taliban needs to realize that they need the world more than the world needs the Taliban. With the US Indo-Pacific strategy, the focus on Afghanistan is negligible, and they need to come off this mentality that Afghanistan is like a centerpiece in the great game. Those times have gone. Now the focus is very different. It's Ukraine, it's Palestine, now it's the Indo-Pacific and the US strategy of containment of China. Afghanistan does not fit into this great game of great powers. So they need to come out of this realization. What their clear priorities and agenda should be: the socioeconomic development and prosperity of Afghanistan, and not making Afghanistan a hotbed of terrorism like it was before. And for that, they need to take actionable steps, and they need to engage with the international community. They need the international community's support, not just in terms of economic development, but also in counterterrorism. They will need support if ISKP takes up its head, or there are fractures within the Taliban unity. Then ISKP, and these things have been highlighted in the UN assessments as well, that these fractures may those fractures, by the way, they do exist within the Taliban structure, because it's still not a very coherent government. So they need the support of the international community. They need to work closely with the international community. But I think I don't see this realization from the Taliban side. The way their organization is structured, also the way the people they have appointed in key positions, they come from a background they have a military background, and I think Taliban needs more people who have diplomatic side to them for engagement with the international community. I think they need to remobilize their Doha office for that purpose. We recently saw a very blatant and divisive statement from one of their deputy foreign minister towards Pakistan, and I think what I can see is that Taliban at this time of at their government, they are trying to have a more nationalist approach, and I think they are trying to become a government in their country and having promoting jingoism and nationalism, and obviously an anti-Pakistan stance towards their people, not focusing on the governance, which should be their top priority. And let me remind you that we cannot give Taliban the excuse of that it's only been 2 years that they have come into power. No, Taliban have been they have been in control of half of the Afghanistan, even when there was the previous Ghani regime was governing Afghanistan. They have been engaged in diplomacy. Even before the Doha deal, their political office was engaged in diplomacy. So they have the experience, they are prepared for this job, but the problem is their mindset. They have to change their mindset, and I think it won't come with just engagement. I think there needs to be some pressure tactics. Taliban, unfortunately, they understand the language of power. They don't understand the language of diplomacy.
What possible pressure tactics could be employed here?
Well, I think one thing is that the UN chief talked about a contact group that can comprise of, and it's a proposal that can comprise of the 5 permanent Security Council members, the neighboring countries, and some international donors. I think this contact group is the need of the time. And this contact group can become the pressure tactic. It can, give the carrot and stick, have that policy with the donors, putting something on the table for the Taliban, and also there should be a stick from the, these permanent.
When you talk of carrot and stick approach, are there any measures through which the Afghan Taliban could be incentivized, and perhaps something in return could be taken from them?
I think with the Ambassador mentioned the frozen funds that US has. It's almost $7 or $8 billion in US banks. I think that can be a very lucrative carrot for the Taliban to rope them into the engagement and make them fulfill their commitments that they have made to the international community. And I think also it's very unfair to the people of Afghanistan as well that those funds have been frozen in US banks and they cannot access those funds. Then, of course, Taliban's persistent demand has been the lifting of international sanctions on key members of their cabinet, and they cannot travel internationally. So I think that can be another carrot for them, that lifting of those UN sanctions.
So which out of the 3 that I have already mentioned, not allowing the Afghan soil to be used for any terrorist activities, inclusive government, as well as the respect for human rights, especially of women and girls, which out of the 3 has a supreme priority for the international community, which it wants the Taliban to be fulfilling at the very first?
You have to study the US recently State Department's country integrated strategy towards Afghanistan, and you'll see that there is a great focus on human rights. There's a great focus on not allowing Taliban government to weaken so much that ISKP takes over and it actually harms US homeland or US interest in the region. So that gives you a very clear indication. But I think for us, from Pakistani perspective, I think our top priority should be law and order and security and cross-border terrorism, cross-border narco trafficking, the supply of arms, illegal US weapons left in Afghanistan to TTP. Our top priority should be, I think there is a great consensus among the regional communities and the international community on the key issues. But I think Pakistan should push more on the security front, because that serves our interest. Okay, human rights, it's very important and we should talk about that. But I think from a very realistic perspective, security should be our top concern.
Right, you already mentioned of the frozen assets by the US of the Afghan people, right, around $7 billion. So that could be a first step on the part of the US regarding incentivizing the Afghan Taliban. When it comes to dealing with terrorism, overall, we have seen a number of statements coming from the State Department's cooperation towards Pakistan in dealing with banned Taliban Pakistan, and amid this particular recent resurgence of terrorism. Now, when Pakistan had already done so much, the assistance in Afghan peace and reconciliation process, also hosting the Afghan refugees for years, those frozen assets, we saw Pakistani authorities also speaking about that, also urging the international community to continuously engage with the Afghan people and Afghan Taliban to overcome that dire humanitarian and economic crisis. Despite Pakistan having done so much, shouldn't there be a concrete step on the part of the Afghan Taliban naturally as a matter of reciprocation that they should be addressing this very legitimate concern of Pakistan, of dismantling Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is so with impunity operating from Afghanistan?
Yeah, it's I think a very, very interesting question, and I think at this point, with of course the UN analytical report coming out a few weeks ago, it has made clear that the Taliban regime is using TTP as a bargaining chip, as a leverage over Pakistan. There have been clear links, direct support. I mean, for example, how clear it can get that the Taliban regime is giving $55,000 per month to the TTP chief Nur Wali Masood. There's money involved, there is support involved, and there's the weapons are, the US left weapons are there available for the TTP to purchase from, not just from the black markets of Afghanistan, but also from the Taliban. So I mean, it's clear that they're using this strategy, and they will ultimately realize that it's not in their benefit, it does not serve their interest as well. But I think they're approaching this through a very myopic approach currently, and I think I'll blame it on the current leadership of Taliban that they have appointed in key positions. They're not looking at this in the bigger picture of how stability in Pakistan can be beneficial to stability in Afghanistan, and how these two countries are, as Ambassador has explained, how these countries are integrated, how their interest and their cultures and religion and everything is so much, so many commonalities. So I think it's their myopic approach, and they will realize. But again, there needs to be international pressure through diplomacy, through pressure tactics, through regional coercion, everything. I mean, that can comes under the diplomatic norms.
Right, Ambassador Khan, when you talk about those assets which have been frozen by the US to be unfreezed for the Afghan, so they, of course, if they are unfrozen, they are to be used by the authorities which are in place over there, and they happen to be the Afghan Taliban. There is a case of weapons left over after the international troops withdrawal. And there are multiple reports by the United Nations Security Council committees which point to the fact that those weapon leftovers actually fell into the hands of the terrorist groups, particularly when you talk about Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. And those have been used in the terrorist activities in Pakistan. There is irrefutable evidence in regard to that also. That has been shared with the Afghan Taliban. So multiple, as Mr. Durrani has mentioned, the recent report by the United Nations Security Council Committee also speaks of the fact that TTP is being supported by the Afghan Taliban. So if the weapon left over can fall into the hands of Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan with the assistance of the Afghan authorities, and if those $7 billion are unfrozen, do you exactly think that those $7 billion would be used for the welfare of the general populace over there in Afghanistan, not for the wrong purposes?
Okay, first of all, I seem to sound as if I'm constantly speaking or trying to defend the Taliban government. There are many, many issues that I have personally, and in many cases, I think what they do does not make sense and is actually counterproductive for them. But as far as your question about the weapons is concerned, the Americans did not need to leave Afghanistan in indecent haste. It was not like Vietnam people hanging onto helicopters and the Viet Cong are approaching. They had their time to leave Afghanistan. You tell me, how long does it take to destroy the weapons that you are talking about? So there is some more complicated issue behind that, okay? And there are many people who have speculated about it. I also speculate, I have no evidence, but common sense will tell you that if you have billions of dollars of weapons, the first thing you would do is either find a way to take them back or to destroy them. If you are in such a hurry that you cannot have a route back, then you destroy those weapons, okay? Now, as far as inclusive governments are concerned, my question to you is, in the whole of the Middle East and with other close friends that we have, how many governments are inclusive governments? Why do you continue to insist on a nascent government to be inclusive at this stage,
Okay, so if it doesn't happen to be naturally a question of an inclusive government, as you have made a comparison with the other countries in the world, so why promise for that at the very first place? Why did the Taliban promise if they didn't have the capacity and the will to do
I'll
that?
come to that point. But the other thing I want to tell you, or another question that I have in my mind, the success of China in Afghanistan, it's a matter of trust. Okay, China also has issues regarding terrorism. Xinjiang province, people have an organization that actually has been given sanctuary in this region. Not necessarily exactly there, but everybody knows about it. Despite this, the Chinese have got the trust of the Afghans enough to sign important deals with them and to have a continued long-term. Their approach to countries is very different to the way certain other powerful countries do. So they don't go in there to try to change your government or to have conflict over there. Like the Democratic Republic of Congo has a lot of minerals, so all you see is mercenaries and every single government that's interested over there.
Right.
We have a problem of trust. Why is it that we have been host for the last 4 decades to so many Afghan refugees, and yet the popular will in Afghanistan is against Pakistan? We have a problem of image. We need to change that. We need friends around us. How many friends do we have in this neighborhood? Do you know that India paid to develop Chabahar port, which is a rival port, is trying to bring traffic through Iran and Afghanistan?
Your point is well taken. I've understood. Unfortunately, we are short of time. Let me bring this particular point. The question of image when it comes to Pakistan dealing with Afghan Taliban. Mr. Malik, your quick take.
Before I answer your question, I would just like to, give my comment on what very aptly Ambassador Khan has, flagged the issue of American exit. During their presence here, there were hundreds of flights south to north and north to south, which were bringing in supplies and logistic support to Americans, and they had ample time to plan their exit.
Perhaps they have learned their lesson from that particular mistake. If they left those weapons there, that's why they froze those.
No, but I am trying to highlight and reinforce
so that if they also fall into the wrong hands.
These weapons were not left, without a plan, because every theater, every military component, they have an exit strategy and a denial plan in case they cannot, withdraw their weapons.
So,
destroying those weapons is a matter of, days only. So they deliberately left this because they wanted, this government to remain under certain, turmoil and unrest in the region.
Pakistan having done so much, despite that, still Pakistan needs to improve its image with the Afghan Taliban. Do you agree with this particular
I
point?
think Pakistan should deal with them little from position of strength, and this is the only language that they understand.
Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik, senior analyst, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ahsan Durrani, unfortunately we are short of time. I'll have to end the show right over here. Director Policy Research Center, thank you very much for being with us on the show. Mr. Nasir Ali Khan, former ambassador. Mr. Khan, thank you once again for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take care of yourselves.